Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm your host, Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen, as always, is Joe Clark. We're going to be diving into some of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week, though it is the dead of the offseason at this point, so biggest topics of the week is a little bit more difficult to track down this time of year, but we're going to make a show out of it and talk about some of the bigger things this week. Joe, before we dive in, you had the last week off. Obviously, you came in for the podcast, but that was you kind of coming off your vacation to make that happen. So, tell us a little bit about your break, and did you end up going to the parade for the Celtics?
Yeah. I went to the Celtics parade on Friday. That was pretty fun. Got some good pictures, and then went down the Cape for the weekend for an engagement party. So spent went down there Friday night after the parade. Spent pretty much a day and a half down there. So that or 2.5 days down there. Came back on Monday. So that was a good time. It was a good weekend. It was fun.
Good, good. Get some time away, and this is the perfect time of year to do that. So, we're going to move into our first topic that we're going to talk about today, and this is centered around tight end Pat Freiermuth. Obviously, this year, tight ends figure to play quite a bit bigger of a role than they have in recent years in the Steelers' offense. Pat Freiermuth had kind of his most productive season with Ben Roethlisberger. Well, he had a pretty decent season in 2022 with Kenny Pickett that first year, but last year, due to injuries and due to the offense just not using the middle of the field, Freiermuth really didn't have a great season, and it wasn't good timing for him given he's due for a contract extension this year, and we're still kind of waiting to see if that will happen. We think it probably will, but it's not a sure thing, I would say. But I think it was Brooke Pryor of ESPN wrote that Pat Freiermuth surprised the most out of anybody during the spring practices, and I think Mark Cabali of the Athletic, followed that up and said Freiermuth has looked the best that he's looked during an off season so far. And so, Joe, what do you think about kind of what is the potential of Freiermuth this year within Arthur Smith's tight end friendly offense?
Yeah, I kind of thought we were going to get a Freiermuth breakout last season after the strength, his first two seasons, 60 plus receptions. But the hamstring injury kind of nagged him early, and things just never got going for him. I mean, we saw the flash that it was a week 12 against Cincinnati. He had, I think, 100 plus yards. Um, but yeah, now you bring in a coordinator who loves to use his tight end and Arthur Smith throughout his entire, tenure calling plays. The tight end's been a big part of the offense going back to Tennessee. You had Jonnu Smith in Atlanta. You have Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith last year. He had a pretty big season. Now he's in Miami. So I think, given that Freeman supposedly looks as good as he's looked, and he's really looked good in camp, that he's going to have a big role for this team. And you look that they don't have, a clear cut wide receiver two on the roster as we sit here right now. Who's to say Pat Freiermuth can't be, the number two pass catcher in this offense? I mean, he had what 60 receptions as a rookie, 63 receptions in 2022. George Pickens led the Steelers with 63 receptions last year. Obviously, you don't want to replicate last season's passing attack, but there's nothing saying that Freiermuth can't get 65, 70 receptions even this year with the way Smith uses his tight ends. And become really like de facto number two, not obviously not number two receiver, but number two pass catcher behind Pickens, and can be a really productive player. I mean, teams have used tight ends as essentially that primary or number two receiver. The Patriots did with Rob Gronkowski. The Chiefs are doing it with Travis Kelce. I mean, the Chiefs did it back in the day with Tony Gonzalez. The Chargers with Antonio Gates. Freiermuth isn't that caliber player, but there's nothing stopping him from taking on a much bigger role and becoming more of a featured pass catcher in this offense. And I think it's something that we're definitely going to see. But if it happens, I think we'll see it pretty early on in the regular season, and we'll start to get a glimpse of it at training camp.
Yeah, Arthur Smith in the 5 seasons that he had 2 as the offensive coordinator with the Tennessee Titans, 3 as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. And if you add up kind of the totality of the tight end groups for each of those 5 teams, his tight end position was averaging 1,025 receiving yards and 7.4 touchdowns over those 5 seasons. Now, not all of that would be on one player, though I believe Kyle Pitts may have had a 1,000-yard season a couple years ago. if Freiermuth and or Connor Hayward can combine for that amount, that's roughly wide receiver two production. And so yeah, the Steelers might be kind of following the mold of the Chiefs or even the Ravens when Mark Andrews is healthy. They haven't really had too many great receivers over the last handful of years. So yeah, I think it's a viable approach, and maybe one of the reasons why this wide receiver trade that everyone's been anticipating for so long, maybe that's part of the reason why maybe the team doesn't view it as urgent as the rest of us do because of that tight end position. And so, what was the direct quote from Kabali here? It said, nobody performed better and more consistently for 4 weeks than Freiermuth. He had an instant connection with Russell Wilson and came across as a potential playmaker in Arthur Smith's tight end heavy offense. So yeah, I mean, at one of the probably most important positions in the offense, he had one of the best off seasons so far. Now, obviously, the pads haven't come on. It's hard to, give any, definitive answers on who's looked the best, but it's better to have looked the best up to this point than to have not. And Freiermuth appears to be on that trajectory. What is your thoughts on? I mean, a lot of people assume that an extension's coming. If you're in Freiermuth's position, I mean, you're coming off an injury-hampered season. You're coming off the worst season of your career. If you're him or his agent, what kind of offer would it have to be for him to want to accept it? So I mean, we're looking at probably, hopefully, this being the best season of his career, kind of a breakout year, and then maybe he's locked himself into a couple-year contract. What do you? If you're him, would you sign a contract right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Steelers are going to take care of him because his first two seasons were really pretty solid. His rookie season, he had 7 touchdowns. Didn't have a ton of receiving yards, 497 on 60 catches, but then he kind of took a leap. His touchdown production went down, but 63 catches, 732 yards. When you look at last season, I think from the Steelers, the front office perspective, you really got to factor in, poor quarterback play out of Kenny Pickett. The team didn't really utilize the middle of the field. You had Matt Canada calling the plays, and Freiermuth was banged up. And when you look at, I know last year when we were looking at comparables, with Cole Kmet got paid, TJ Hawkinson got paid by Minnesota. So you're looking at, bigger tight end contracts. And so I think Farm was probably looking somewhere in the range of, 9.5, 10 million a season. So I don't know. I could see the team signing him somewhere three for 30, 3 for 33, maybe even get up to 11. Some of that maybe, incentivized, obviously not all guaranteed. So I think Freiermuth, and especially given what if the injuries flare up again? He's had 2 concussions. He's had, last year was the hamstring. So for him, I think he's kind of incentivized to get locked up long term because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you can get hurt again. He gets a 3rd concussion this season, and there's a lot of questions about his long term future. So I think for team and player, that a deal is probably going to get done at some point now within the next few weeks.
Yeah, that's fair. And sticking with the tight end position, I think was it Ray Fittipaldo of the Pittsburgh Post Gazette was on the Fan yesterday and was talking about Darnell Washington and basically saying, I don't expect his role as a receiver to increase pretty much at all. I know a lot of people kind of, when he was drafted, he had that good 40 time. He had some of those good catches at the combine. I think he had that one-hand grab over near the sideline that got people excited about his potential, excuse me, as a receiver in the Steelers offense. And he only had, very, very limited catches last year. What was the actual total here?
Seven catches for 61 yards.
Yeah, he had a couple of first downs. I mean, so. I mean, with Arthur Smith's offense using tight ends, you would think that would go up just a little bit, but I mean, maybe that kind of goes to someone like Hayward or even Michael Pruitt or somebody. But do you see his role going up as a receiver at all? I know tight end coach Alfredo Roberts last year kind of said, he will get better as a receiver. He's improving in that way. Darnell Washington himself said he put a lot of time into his route running this year. So where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see it go up personally, just because, what we saw in college, it seems like he could, potentially be an okay backup receiving tight end, but the Steelers don't necessarily have to put him into that role. And with the concerns about his knee injuries, getting him out, limiting the time he's in, the open field can get, chopped down, is probably something that they at least want to do now early in his career. And they have Connor Hayward and they signed Michael Pruitt, even, maybe Rodney Williams. I don't think they're gonna have 5 tight ends on the roster. So, one of Pruitt or Rodney Williams, but Pruitt has a history of being a decent receiving tight end. Hayward last year had some 23 grabs. So he, outproduced Washington in the receiving game. You figure maybe he gets more of a bump this season with the tight end being used more. So while I'd like to see Washington use more, I don't think the Steelers have to use it more. And because of that, I think they'll probably primarily, still stick to use him as a blocker. Maybe his role will increase a little bit, but I don't think there's going to be anything that, where he's a consistent contributor in the receiving game. Maybe instead of, 7 receptions, it's 15 or 20 this year, but, nothing crazy where he's really taking on a role in the passing game this year. Again, maybe down the line that changes, but there's really the Steelers don't need him to do it now. So I just don't see it really happening, him taking a big jump this year.
Yeah, I mean, even if he doesn't see a huge increase in receptions, I personally would love to see him used in the red area a little bit more. I mean, he's so big.
Definitely.
Throw up some of these kind of fades or whatever you want to do. Put it in a spot where only he could get it at his height, and if the worst case is it kind of sails out of the back of the end zone. I'm okay with taking a couple chances there, and I think Russell Wilson has the touch to, maybe make some of those connections. But you mentioned Michael Pruitt and Rodney Williams there. Who do you think? I mean, if they keep, I think the Steelers have kept 3 tight ends the last couple of years. The Arthur Smith's teams have kept 4 the last couple of years. I would assume they probably will keep 4 this year, just given the importance of the position. Do you lean either way in terms of Williams versus Pruitt?
Williams is good on, excuse me. Wow. Williams is good on special teams last year, but I think Pruitt's familiarity with Arthur Smith, he was with him. I think he was with him in Tennessee too, and he was obviously with him in Atlanta. I think Pruitt's probably going to win out that job. And honest, I mean, Pruitt was I remember when he came out of the draft, he was a pretty intriguing prospect. And I'm sure Williams can go back on the practice squad, and kind of be that guy. So I would right now I'd go with Pruitt. I do think that might be, really a true camp battle between the two of them for that last spot. So I think right now it might be a little bit too early, but given Pruitt's history with Smith, he would be my pick right now. But that's going to be, a very unheralded battle, but one maybe to watch in the Tro between the two of them to see who can win out. And it honestly might come down to special teams. So that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I think I looked into their special team stuff, and Pruitt only played on a couple of units and didn't play that much special teams, and Williams kind of emerged as a special teamer. And so if it really comes down to special teams, Williams might have the edge. I mean, how old is Michael Pruitt? He's up in his 30s for sure. He is 32 years old, and so if you're looking at maybe getting a younger guy in there who can play more special teams, I kind of lean towards Williams, but I get where you're coming from with Pruitt and his familiarity with Arthur Smith. That'll help, and that those kind of guys, there's a bunch of them on the roster that have familiarity with Smith's offensive system. Those kinds of guys will help. Everybody around them kind of understand the lingo, play a translator, if you will, from Arthur Smith's offense to the rest of the players, just kind of help get them up to speed. And so it's good to have him around. I don't know if he'll stick, but there's a chance. Moving on to our next topic. I don't want to touch on this for too long, but somewhat notable this week. Wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, we've been talking about him all offseason now, dating back to pretty much ever since Deontay Johnson was traded to the Carolina Panthers. There's been, he held out at OTAs, he held out at mandatory minicamp, he's gone on social media and kind of been cryptic, and now maybe even a little less cryptic, a little more forward with what he kind of understands of his contract negotiations with the 49ers. He doesn't seem happy, but Ryan Clark, the former Steeler there, went on, I think it was Get Up or one of the ESPN shows, and basically was like, Aiyuk talked, they talked on their Pivot podcast, which I guess is coming out tomorrow on Friday, and Aiyuk said that they had planned on meeting. There was a subsequent report that said the meeting went well, and they're basically still working towards a contract extension. Do you are you, I guess, less? Where have you been with Brandon Aiyuk in terms of, do you think he is a possibility, and does this change anything in your mind?
I just don't think he's much of a possibility because I don't see the Steelers going and making him the highest paid player on the roster right off the bat. Would I love to have Ayuk in Pittsburgh, and do I think he'd be the perfect fit next to George Pickens? Absolutely. But I just think that paying him, what he wants, $30 million. I think paying him $30 million, making him the highest paid player on the roster, is just something that the Steelers haven't done. And I know things are different under Omar Khan. This offseason's been very different, but it still would be a huge break in precedent to go and bring in somebody from the outside and immediately make them, the highest paid guy, basically, the most important guy making the most money on the roster. So for that reason, I've always been a little skeptical about Ayuk coming to Pittsburgh. I think a lot of what he's done has just been very public to make it a leverage play and stay in San Francisco. And I think that's ultimately what's going to end up happening. That if the two of them like had a meeting, and I think there would have been more, and things weren't great, then there probably would be more urgency to try to trade him while he can. Um, and so I think he's ultimately ended up staying in San Francisco. I think Deebo Samuel after this season is probably going to get traded because you're not going to be able to, pay both him and Ayuk. But for this season, they'll run it back. They'll pay Ayuk, they'll run it back, and then maybe Deebo next year. But I don't know if that'll happen in Pittsburgh. But I think that's probably the situation that's going to, work itself out.
Yeah, the further we get along into this thing, I just can't really see any of these names that have been thrown around working out in terms of a trade. I mean, Cortland Sutton seems pretty set on wanting to stay in Denver. And, they've said nothing but good things about him. It seems like, to me, something probably will get worked out there. I mean, I don't think that they're going to want to move on from Judy and Sutton in the same offseason. And then, of course, Ayuk and Samuel. I mean, again, with what you just said with their salary, I can't see the Steelers bringing them in, making them the highest paid players. And another interesting one is DK Metcalf. But, Seattle beat writers have kind of assured Dave that doesn't seem like a possibility. I know Dave had that article that kind of explained why maybe it could be, given the Seahawks cap situation and given Metcalf kind of the cap savings that could be had, or spreading out the dead money over the next 2 years now that we're past June 1st. And so, and of course, Russell Wilson goes out there and he's training with DK Metcalf, throwing balls to him yesterday morning. And so that's going to flare up some of those trade, I guess, speculations out in the ether. But yeah, the more I look at it, I mean, maybe something in season is kind of where I'm leaning at this point, or maybe you're picking up somebody after roster cutdowns, but it's, how big of an impact player are you going to get after roster cutdowns? I know the Steelers have brought in some guys late in the process before that have played pretty well for them. Like, Quan Alexander was brought in pretty late last year, and what was Vance McDonald kind of a late in the process thing, if I'm remembering correctly, back during his year. I can't remember that far back, but there's been some guys who have been brought in late. But at wide receiver, with how valuable that is right now, I don't know how many of these kind of guys that are going to be able to step in as a wide receiver 2 over somebody like Van Jefferson or Calvin Austin III or Scotty Miller or whoever. I personally am struggling to see a path to that right now. And so, kind of going back to our tight end discussion, hopefully somebody like Freiermuth can step up and be that wide receiver too. Moving on to our third topic, offensive tackle. We had some news, I believe, this week, or a report rather. I think that was also from Kabali of The Athletic, saying that Broderick Jones will start out training camp on the left side, and that Troy Fautanu and Dan Moore Jr. will be battling it out on the right. Joe, what are your thoughts on that? Does that seem like the correct approach?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Omar Khan said back in the combine that they want Broderick Jones on the left side. That's where he's going to play, and that Fautanu is going to play on the right side. Uh, the only thing that maybe isn't the right approach is playing Dan Moore on the right side. But if the team wants to keep him on the roster, he has to get better on the right side. So giving him more reps on the right side is only going to, be better for him, because he has to get better on the right side to really be able to be this team swing tackle. Because everything we've heard and coming out of camp, every time he's played on the right side, is that he hasn't been very good there. Even, Mike Tomlin hasn't, this offseason wasn't super, excited about Dan Moore's work on the right side. So, and now he's entering year 4. He's got to get better on the right side if he's going to stick, if Broderick's going to play on the left. So, yeah, it makes sense to have them both on the right side. What I don't really agree with is Capoli also said that it's quite possible that Moore wins the job. I don't see how he beats out Furtado on the right side just because of how we've heard his struggles, as a right tackle. So that's one that I have a tough time wrapping my head around. But I do like that they're starting out with Jones on the left side and Fautanu and more on the right side.
Yeah, Mike, the kind of assumption I've been operating under is that Fautanu is going to have to prove that he is a better right tackle than Dan Moore Jr. is a left tackle. And now we're kind of shifting into this thing where it's like, okay, it's going to be a true right tackle competition between Fautanu and Moore. And to me, that's going to easily be Fautanu. I mean, yeah, maybe he also doesn't have the experience on the right side, the same as Dan Moore. But Dan Moore himself has said that he's not comfortable on the right side. And you would think, he knew that there was a competition brewing when he said that. He wouldn't just say that. So, if he's saying he's uncomfortable on the right side, he's uncomfortable on the right side. And that paves the way for Fautanu to possibly be a week 1 kind of starter. And, so maybe we do end up with 2 rookie week 1 starters. I don't know when the last time that happened. Would that happen in the Kendrick Green year? Were there 2 week 1 rookies
On offense or on the offensive line?
on the offensive line?
No, I think it was just Green. Or no, it was just Green because that was 2020. That was 2022. No, was that 2021?
2021. Yeah.
So that was that Green and Dan Moore. So that might have been. I'm trying to wrap my head around when the COVID year was and when Dan Moore's entering year. I'll look it up.
Yeah, I'll vamp. Yeah, but to me, having 2 rookies along the offensive line start in week 1, I mean, all the kind of no game is easy, but there are some easier games towards the beginning of the schedule. I'm not opposed to getting both these guys in there so that by the time they hit, the tough meat part of the schedule, hopefully they're kind of gelling as a unit. And, I think that is the correct approach. I don't know. I mean, on the other hand, the Steelers really do need to win some of these early games to set themselves up well for the end of the season. So if there are significant growing pains, that could be an issue. But do you have the answer for us there?
Yeah, 2021 was both rookie Dan Moore and rookie Kendrick Green starting. That team started 4 rookies on offense because Najee and Freiermuth both started as well. So yeah, Dan Moore was the 4th round pick, and then Kendrick Green was the 3rd. So yeah, that is interesting that it's now the 2nd time in 3 seasons that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's not ideal, but hopefully this
No.
time it goes quite a bit better, and I think it will. There's really no reason to believe that Zach Frazier can't be better than Kendrick Green. That seems like pretty obvious. And as far as Dan Moore, I mean, he started a whole lot of games. You can't discount that. That is important. It's like something like 56 or 57 games he's started over his career so far. I mean, that's very few. I mean, we'll talk about it later, but we did our all-time Steelers draft and realized very quickly that there's not that many good tackles in Steelers history, and for him to have started 57 or whatever, that puts him up there in terms of all-time starts for the Steelers at the position. So, yeah, I think overall starting the 2 rookies is probably the correct way to go. Now, we do want to kind of talk about our all-time draft. We won't go through the whole thing, but the first part of the series went up this morning. I believe, what was it, the first 17?
I think it was 13 rounds.
13
maybe?
rounds. Yeah, that makes sense. We had 26 total players. 6 of us here at Steelers Depot. It was Joe, myself, Josh, Scott, Dave, and Alex. We all drafted. Our pool of players was any Steeler that has ever been on the team. We only drafted based on players who, the time that they spent with the Steelers. So somebody like, Johnny Unitas, who was drafted by the Steelers, is not an eligible pick, even though he went on to have a great career elsewhere. And so we're only looking at their playing time during the Steelers. tenure. And Joe, actually, did you have the first? Yeah, you had the first overall pick, and this was a snake draft. And so Joe had to pick first and then wait, until it came all the way back around for him to make 2 back-to-back picks there. Joe, who are your first 3 selections?
Yeah, first I want to say I was really annoyed I had the first pick because I didn't want to have to make this decision. But I had to decide between, Ben Roethlisberger, Terry Bradshaw. And I went with Roethlisberger because, it's the guy I grew up watching. His counting stats are better. And the way I built my roster, I think he would be a solid quarterback. So I went with Ben Roethlisberger in the first round. So then I had to wait all the way until loop back around at the end of the snake in the second. And then I took Donnie Shell, and then I took Demonte Dawson with my 2 back-to-back in the second and the third.
Hey, can't go wrong taking the 2 guys who touch the ball on every single play on offense are rock solid on your roster. And yeah, I mean, like, there's really only the 2 quarterbacks that are, you'd really like go out of your way to select. And so most of us waited till later in the draft to kind of take your Cordell Stewarts and your Neil O'Donnells and some of these other guys. So yeah, it was a fun exercise overall for my team. I had the 3rd pick, and I stirred up a little bit of controversy by after the first 2 quarterbacks were taken, which was kind of the given. I ended up taking Rod Woodson over a guy like Joe Green. I've been taking a little flack for that. That's all right. The way I saw it is there was far less good corners on the Steelers have had some great corners, but they haven't had that many good corners. As we all found out throughout this exercise, you get into these later rounds and we start talking about like, it was joking. Nobody took Artie Burns, but we start throwing a name like that out there. And it got slim pickings towards the end of the draft. But after my first round pick, I picked Jack Lambert in the second. Very happy about that. In my opinion, I got the best corner and the best off-ball linebacker of all time for the Steelers. And then James Harrison, I picked up in the 3rd round, and so I was pretty happy with that. Both of us got 2 Hall of Famers. You have, I guess, Ben Roethlisberger will be a Hall of Famer. James Harrison, the jury's out on that. Probably not, maybe someday. But yeah, I thought both of our rosters there were pretty strong over the first 3 picks. Everybody kind of got to choose what they wanted to do with their team, and after the first 2 quarterbacks were taken, I went all in on basically a running offense, and so you can check out those rosters on SteelersDepot.com. The first half of the draft is out today. I believe the second half of the draft is out tomorrow, and you'll be able to see our full rosters and what each team was kind of going for. And we'll have more content with kind of surrounding that idea throughout the next few days. So take a look at that. It was very, very fun for us to do the other day. We all had a very good time. I did also want to plug here. Our editor, Scott Brown, had a big hand in putting together the book Legendary that you can order now. And this is a book about Dick LeBeau and the legendary 2008 Steelers defense. And this is actually, Dick LeBeau. It's not just about him. Dick LeBeau, this is his book that Scott and another guy actually put together. And so this is a book that every Steelers fan, in my opinion, should read. I look forward to getting my copy. And if you guys want to order that book, you can use the code STEEL30. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will put that link to the book in the description of the video. So you guys can click through that, put in that discount code for 30% off. Again, that's STEEL30 and get 30% off on that. Support our editor, Scott Brown, and get a great book about, as Dick LeBeau calls it, basically the best defense of all time in his opinion, or one of them. So yeah, that is all of our topics for today. I did want to get a quick listener question in, which is a good reminder. If you guys have any questions for us, call the number at the bottom of the screen, 412-254-3145. Again, that's 412-254-3145. Leave us a voicemail for a chance to have your question answered in a future episode, and we could sure use some fresh questions. This one doesn't appear left a name, but I'm going to go ahead and play that.
Hey, Ross and Joe. Been loving the show so far. Just wanted to kind of put my theory out on why the Steelers didn't pick up the option on Najee Harris. I think there's some real division in that building between him and Jaylen Warren. And if you pick up that option, you kind of set the floor for any running back in that room at that option number. And what's to say that Jaylen Warren doesn't come out and look like the better back in this zone system that Arthur Smith's going to run? And then you got a dilemma where you've got fully guaranteed money to Najee Harris, and maybe you can trade him. But if you want to extend or give something to Warren, you're already kind of setting your floor. I just think they're not sure who the better back is, and that's leading them to kind of see what happens this year, even if it means they got to spend more on Najee in the next offseason. So keep up the great work, guys, and let me know your thoughts.
All right, so this guy called in and kind of put out his theory about why Najee Harris's fifth-year option was declined. We've talked about this a little bit, but he's basically saying they're not sure who the better running back is between him and Jaylen Warren. He's suggesting there might even be some internal, turmoil between the two. I don't know if I've seen anything like that or that would suggest that. Everything that they've said, at least outwardly, and of course they're not gonna come out and talk trash on their teammates, but everything that they've said about each other. Of course, we haven't heard from Najee Harris this offseason yet, but Jaylen Warren has been complimentary of Najee, and it seems like that room has been fairly no turmoil from what I've seen. But yeah, an interesting theory in terms of just setting the floor for a contract for whether it be Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren if they had accepted that. Now we have to keep in mind that Jaylen Warren can be easily retained next offseason for likely they'd put the second round RFA tender on him, which would be $4.978 million, which is a little bit less than Najee Harris's $6.79 million that he would have had fully guaranteed for 2025 had they picked that up. Yeah, I mean, Joe, where do you come in? I mean, what do you see happening with the running back room? I know we had that debate article the other day about this very topic, but do you see them extending Najee at some point this offseason? Do you see them waiting and just doing something with Jaylen Warren? Where are you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, pretty torn on the idea of what they're actually going to do. The idea, the caller setting the floor, it's interesting. It kind of tracks, but I think by the time, Jaylen Warren's due for a real extension besides just getting the RFA tender, by the time they'd really look to extend him long term. Who knows what the state of the running back market's going to be at that point. So it's kind of difficult to, look at that now and equate it to, 2 or 3 years down the road. But it's an interesting thought for sure. But I don't really know what they're going to do with Harris because they leave the door open for an extension. They could theoretically, I know we've looked at Ramondre Stevenson as kind of the comparable contract there. They could certainly give him a deal like that, but then they have, Harris, they'll have Harris and Warren long term, which I think would be great. I think it would be beneficial, but then again, paying a running back, Harris has a lot of tread on his tires. He had the Liz Frank injury 2 seasons ago, so there's pluses and minuses to really paying him and committing to him long term. So we'll see what's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they sign him to an extension, just given everything they've said since declining his option. But at the same time, I'm not sure that would necessarily be the best move. I like the pairing, but I don't know. And this is one of the things that's really baffled me this offseason about what they're going to do, because I thought for sure they'd pick up the option and just deal with things, kick it down the line, but that's obviously not what happened. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens and to actually hear from Harris in training camp and what his thoughts are on the whole situation.
Yeah, I know there's the kind of idea that running backs are fungible, and to a certain extent they are. We've seen, the Steelers have an example on their own roster with Jaylen Warren stepping in as an undrafted free agent to play roughly the same, if not a little better than Najee Harris, who was a first-round pick. But to a certain extent, the Steelers are very clearly moving towards a run-first identity. Arthur Smith, I doubt this will be his only season in Pittsburgh. The Steelers don't really terminate contracts unless your name is Matt Canada. And so if they're going to continue with their running identity, I don't really want to disrupt what they have, which seems to be working over the last, 10 weeks of last season or 9 weeks of last season. They were the third best rushing group in the league. We saw what happened when Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard in Dallas, when Zeke left and Pollard kind of struggled. He wasn't able to do the same things he was when they were splitting the load. And I kind of like what they have, and they finally have an offensive line to make things work with the running game. And it would be a real shame to then have the offensive line but not have the running backs, or maybe they have Jaylen Warren and they add somebody in the middle of next year's draft or something, and it's just rolling the dice. And if this is the main thing that you want your offense to be able to do, and especially with no clear quarterback of the future, I really want them to figure a way out to have both Jalen and Najee on the team beyond just this season. I'm hoping, at least a couple more years out of the pair of them, because I really do think that they complement each other well. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Maybe an extension will happen this offseason. Maybe we'll have to wait to talk about this next year. Anybody's guess. But that is everything that we have for our show today. I'm Ross McCorkle. That's Joe Clark. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.